In today's episode of Today in World War II, December 28th, the Soviets say sayonara to all their troops surrounded unfinished territory. Mussolini cries to Hitler and says, "Those Greeks are being mean to me. I need some help." The United States Navy makes a very prescient and wise decision to form construction battalions. That's going to be a key development for the war moving forward. Kansas City All-Star George Brett arrived in Darwin, Australia. And in December 28th, Hitler decides that, well, if he can't save his werewolf headquarters in Ukraine, you might as well blow it up to prevent Stalin from parading it all over Moscow. And finally, there's a surface battle between the Royal Navy and a bunch of German destroyers that did not go well for the Germans. Let's get started. Okay, so on December 28th, 1939, the Soviet troops decide, you know what, we're going to have to rethink this and try a new tact when it comes to defeating the Finns in the Winter War. And they did not have any problem at all sacrificing the troops that were currently enveloped, surrounded by the Finns and those mutis that I had talked about in previous videos. They just said, you know what? You're on your own. So they stopped making any attempts to save them or supply them. They were abandoned and they were eventually eliminated by the Finns. Hard to imagine, that decision being made by a Western democracy. Soviets had a different attitude towards war, as we've seen, as we see what's happening, in Ukraine now. So, when the enemy makes mistakes, you don't prevent them. You say, okay, keep doing it. It's fine. And the Finns were able to eliminate that threat, get rid of those troops that could have been used to be rescued and fight against them later. And, of course, the only issue with that is that, the Soviets tended to have an unlimited amount of men they could throw at an enemy. So that was their trump card, if you want to call it that, no pun intended. But what I want you to do is subscribe to my channel, click on the bell that will allow you to get, or YouTube will, uh, notify you whenever there's a new video dropped. And that way you're in the club. So I hope you can do that. Thank you. On December 28th, 1940, Mussolini just about had enough of those Greeks because, he made the misguided decision to invade Greece, thinking that the Greeks would be a, it'd be a walkover. They'd be easy pickings. Well, apparently he forgot about history and he didn't live long enough to watch those horrible movies about the 300 standing against Persia. But he should have. He should have known that. He should have known that ahead of time, that the Greeks would fight for their freedom and for their land. And not only did they knock or stop the Italians from conquering their country, they actually went in and were very close to driving the Italians into the sea. That's how bad it got. So Mussolini did what any bully will do when the school kid that he thinks is an easy victim and punches in the nose and he gets pummeled in response. He goes to his bigger bully friend and says and tries to get his help. And sadly for the Greeks, the Germans did go in. We'll chronicle that later in this series or this in our project here. But nevertheless, it must have felt really good, for the Greeks to hear that Mussolini had to go quite to get the Germans to help him. So anyway, if you like my videos, if you like my accent when I make fun of Mussolini, then you need to like my video. So go ahead and go down and click on the thumbs up, and then leave a comment and say, "Poor little Mussolini," or whatever you want to do, because it helps me with the algorithm. Okay, thanks a lot. On December 28th, 1941, United States Chief of Staff, excuse me, the United States Navy Chief of Bureau of Yards and Docks, Rear Admiral Ben Morrell, requested that the U.S. Navy start recruiting and compiling or forming construction battalions. They were known later as Seabees. I'm sure that if you have any kind of if you have any kind of knowledge of World War II, you'll know just how important the Seabees were in the war to come because we were taking jungle islands, atolls, coral, and the whole key to taking back the Pacific from the Japanese was air power and land-based air power. The carriers, we didn't have enough carriers to begin with. During the first 2 years of the war, we lost a lot of carriers, and many times we only had one carrier available. Certainly not enough to provide air cover for our troops. We needed to have land-based aircraft, which usually was Army, or excuse me, Marine and Navy, although the Army did come in as well. But this was a very, very prescient and brilliant decision. They had the foresight to know that we're going to need these. And the Seabees were great. They were absolutely great. And there was a very bad movie made about them with John Wayne. So if you want to go back and watch a black and white movie, you can go ahead and do that. So that was fun. And then on December 28, 1941, uh, Kansas City Royals all-star third baseman, 3,000 hits, George Brett, arrived in Darwin, Australia. Maybe it's because of how he was such a great hitter, one of the great hitters of all time. They decided to have him move to the Australia. Hold on, wait a minute. Okay, I'm being told in my ear this is not that George Brett. This is a different George Brett. Never mind. On December 28th, 1943, Adolf Hitler, who was being forced by the Soviets to retreat out of the Ukraine, he had established his werewolf headquarters to direct operations against against the Soviets on the Eastern Front. He had one in Vinnytsia, Ukraine, and since he was being forced to retreat, he made a special order that his werewolf headquarters should be burnt. And this is a quote. He said, "There must be a special detachment at Venetia to burn the whole headquarters down and blow it up. Otherwise, it's important that there be no furniture left. Otherwise, the Russians will send it to Moscow and put it on display. Burn the lot." Doesn't just make you just want to have a teardrop on your, down your, poor to Hitler, oh no. But he's right though. The Soviets absolutely would have paraded that thing all over the place. They paraded captured prisoners. They paraded tanks and different things. Of course, they were going to do that. So, it's kind of like the idea of my dad when we would play Scrabble, and when either me or my mom would beat him in Scrabble, when he knew he was going to lose, and he would just take the board and throw it against the wall. Kind of the same attitude. So, am I saying my dad had Hitler qualities? Yeah, maybe. Anyway, and finally, on December 28th, 1943, there was a sea battle, excuse me, with the Royal Navy against a number of German destroyers. This did not happen very often in the Atlantic theater, but in this case, there were some German merchant ships that the Royal Navy had attacked and sunk, and so a number of destroyers sortied out of port to meet them. Well, it's kind of like taking a knife to a gunfight because German destroyers would not did not would not and did not do well against British cruisers. In this case, it was HMS Glasgow and the HMS Enterprise, and three of the destroyers were sunk. So German surface, if they had to go against the Royal Navy and not pick on lone merchant vessels, they weren't very good. Except for the Bismarck had a good day, but then again, it got sunk. So we'll talk about that later. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I can't wait to get another one out to you tomorrow.